to be covered throughout the audits that are carried out under the TPP. In terms of the food quality standards that are applicable that need to be checked. So we've created certain comparison boxes or charts that can be used by those that are interested in the program. They cover a different variety of food programs such as preventive controls, safety of fresh agricultural products, the hazard, the seafood for juices as well, canned foods, acidified foods, formulas, children's formulas, and dietary supplements, um, among many others. Next slide. Great. So currently, the program has 4 accreditation bodies and 12 certification bodies, and it continues to grow. Here we have some resources that can be used for those of you that are interested in our program. We have a final guideline of models and standards for accreditation that has recommendations about the qualifications of the certification of third parties that must be met in terms of education, experience. We also have a user guideline for accreditation bodies in order to help the entities to send requests for recognition by the FDA as an accreditation body through the website. The user guideline can also help the recognized accreditation bodies to manage their accounts, including the profiles of the certification bodies that they've accredited in this website. As part of the program, FISMA requires to establish a program of user quotas in order to reimburse the agency for the work that we do in the PPP management. And this program of user quotas is within a rule set. The quotas are calculated every fiscal year, and they're published in the record for the 1st of August of every year. The previous rates and the current rates for each fiscal year are available in our website. Next slide, please. Okay, next, let's keep going. Great. As you might recall, the voluntary program of qualified importers, or VIQWIP, is one of the ways how the FDA can use the certificates issued under the TPP. Therefore, VIQWIP and the TPP are interdependent. One of the requirements of the VIQWIP program is that the imported foods from a facility or from a farm are certified under the certification program by accredited third parties of the FDA. The information systems from both programs are connected in such way that the data from the certifications in the TPP are easily available for the importers that request to participate in the VQIP. For that reason, it is important that the interested importers in VQIP, as well as for the foreign suppliers that want to participate in this program or want to have their importers to participate in the program, need to get in touch with each other regarding the products that need to be under the scope of an audit. This year, given the situation of COVID-19, the website for VQuib requests will be open until July 31st. Usually it's open from the 1st of January to the 31st of May of every year. It's worthwhile to note that VCube has a user quota, and this notice is published every year for the month of August. So this is a lot of links on this slide, but by implementing the TPP program, we got a lot of questions. And for that reason, we have an assortment of documents that we hope are useful for those of you that are interested in this program. Among the information, we have an information a sheet about the program. We also have a document with answers to the most common questions that we get about the program thus far. But if you still have specific questions about the program, you can go to the main website, FISMA website, and you can post your question. I'm going to be responsible for answering those questions. So when submitting your question under this system that we know as the TAN, the Technical Assistance Network, the FDA will to monitor the type of doubts that are about the program and create the information that we have on our website. I'll yield the mic to my colleague. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dory. Again, want to also thank you for the invitation to present today. It's an honor to be a part of this symposium. So I will speak a little bit on the laboratory accreditation rule that's coming out of the FSMA regulations. So can I have the next slide, please? So just in terms of this presentation, so as a sort of a high-level overview, this program will create for the accreditation of laboratories, the use of which will be required in certain food testing circumstances. So just as Dory had mentioned, obviously this is a requirement from the Food Safety Modernization Act. Next slide. So just a couple of important dates. January 4th was this, in 2011, was the actual signing of the FSMA regulation. And our draft regulation came out actually November 4th, 2019. Obviously, there's a lot of years in between the enactment of the act and then when we were able to publish. But just as Dory has presented on the third party program, there were a number of FSMA regulations that were sort of a bit higher in the queue, and so as they continued to be rolled out, then we continued our work. And so we finally, as I said, put the draft out in the 4th of November 2019, and the comment period will be until the 6th of July of this year. It had been originally was in March, and then also due to the COVID-19 pandemic that we've extended that out till July 16th. Early 2022 is the date that we believe that the final rule will be placed into effect. Next slide, please. So this is the proposed rule link, and as you'll see on the next slide when I get to it, that we are sort of, since we're still in the comment period, we don't have the ability to speak a lot about the rule as those comments come in, but we do want to focus on making sure that people know where they can find the rule and how they can actually provide comments. And so that really is the crux of this presentation. Next slide. This really just reiterates, as I said, that since we're still in the comment period, we are somewhat limited in what we are able to discuss. And so that's why we'll try to keep this sort of as a high level presentation of the major parts of the regulation that is proposed. Next slide, please. So what does the FSMA actually require of us? So it requires several things. One is that we are required to establish a program for the testing of food by accredited laboratories. We are also required to establish an online registry of FDA accredited or recognized accrediting bodies, and I'll explain that, and accredited laboratories. The program requires that the laboratories must be used from the registry in certain circumstances. And again, in further slides, we'll talk about what are the tests that are covered under the rule. And then finally, results must be sent by the laboratory directly to the FDA. Next slide, please. So what exactly is covered by the rule? So there's essentially these 5 major areas that are there, certain corrective actions that require testing by existing FDA regulations. So these are testings that occur in the bottled water rule, our shell egg regulation, and our sprout regulations. Secondly, to support the removal from import alerts through successive testing. Also, to support the release of a detained import. Fourth, for food testing orders, this is a new tool that we are proposing to implement in the regulation we're putting forth. And then finally, certain corrective actions testing that is conducted in response to certain enforcement circumstances. This is probably uncommon, but this is around some of our additional recall authorities that we've been granted also through FSMA. On the slide that's in front of you here, just kind of shows the basic structure of the accreditation program. So essentially, as the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, we will recognize accreditation bodies. The accreditation bodies will then accredit laboratories, and then the accredited laboratories will actually conduct the food testing, and they'll actually then submit the food testing results and supporting information to the FDA. You'll see on the right side of the screen, owners and consignees will then enter this program by using the accredited laboratories to conduct food testing. Although this diagram is in the published rule, the left arrow is somewhat confusing. It's not really a circular activity here, but kind of just flows down. But here's the basic structure of the rule. Next slide, please. So a little bit about accreditation bodies. I know I don't have to say much of that to those of you that are gathered here at this symposium, but again, accreditation body is a third-party organization that assesses another entity to determine whether the entity satisfies a set of standards and is competent to perform this function. There are ISO standards for accrediting bodies, and particularly 17011. There's a handful of accrediting bodies in the US, and for most countries have at least one accrediting body. And then in terms of international organizations, ILAC is the organization that oversees accrediting bodies, and that will then accredit the laboratories. Next slide, please. So a little bit about test records. So as mentioned in the previous slide, that the test results will be sent directly to the FDA. This is required by the statute. And also what is required will be the submission of the analytical reports to the FDA. Hopefully this rule will sort of increase the clarity around documentation. We know that sometimes that has been somewhat of an issue in terms of what exactly are required. So hopefully this rule will straighten that out. And also you will see within the draft regulation that there is a pathway whereby laboratories with a positive track record may submit significantly abridged reports, which is also something that we hear very commonly about. Next slide, please. So we do not want to reinvent the wheel. We know that ISO has standards that are out there, so we will be incorporating by reference the two of the most widely accepted international consensus standards. So for the accrediting bodies, it will be ISO 17011, and for the laboratories, it will be ISO 17025. Next slide, please. So what are some of the requirements for the recognized accrediting bodies? So as I just mentioned, that they will need to meet ISO 17011 and also be a ILAC signatory. And this is similar to other US government laboratory accreditation programs. They must meet impartiality and conflict of interest requirements. They must be able to evaluate laboratories for accreditation, oversee the accredited laboratories, and we're also requiring that they provide substantial scientific review of certain laboratory documents to support accreditation, and this generally is around method validation and method verifications. Next slide, please. So what are the requirements for the accredited laboratories? So here we have ISO 17025 would be required, plus you will see in the draft some additional model standards that are contained within the rule. They need to demonstrate competence for each of the method to which they seek accreditation. Also must meet impartiality and conflict of interest requirements, meet quality assurance requirements, and also develop or maintain certain sampling records, including written sampling plans. And I'll talk a little bit more about sampling in some subsequent slides. Next slide, please. A little bit more here on laboratories. So this is voluntary participation, but obviously if you want to provide results for the testing that's required under this rule, you have to be a member of the program. Laboratories could be foreign or domestic. Laboratories could be independent or in-house. Next slide. Okay, a little bit more on sampling. So within the draft rule, we're not proposing the requirements for the accreditation of sampling, but we do invite comments. We know that this is also something that is getting a lot of attention, the accreditation, and so we're, as I said, not requiring it in the draft, but we do want as many comments as we can regarding that. We are proposing, though, that the FDA have greater oversight over sampling via records developed if the lab collects the sample, or if obtained by the laboratory if the sample is collected by a non-laboratory. So these will include such things as the sampler's qualifications, the sampling plans, the sample collection report. Next slide. Location of sample collection. So this is an important concept. So generally, the sample must be taken after arrival in the U.S. To accurately represent the condition of the article of food offered for import into the U.S. So we really want to be testing the product as it becomes available to the U.S. public. Now, we will have exceptions, and the exception would be for circumstances in which FDA can determine that a sample taken prior to its arrival is representative. This will be determined on a case-by-case basis. It'll be based on clear evidence that the product sampled and analyzed is actually the product offered for input. And we would invite your comment on this topic as well. Next slide. So this is, again, goes back to the real crux of the presentation here, just in terms of letting people know how to submit comments, reinforcing our desire for as many comments. It's important to provide FDA with this information, because as we get more and more perspective, industry perspective, laboratories perspective, that's how we're going to make this program work as efficiently and as effective as we can. So the top has the website for obtaining and getting to the regulation. And then remember, you have to use the docket number. So remember, FDA 2019N 3325 gets you to the actual draft regulation. And again, remember the submission date of July 6, 2020, I guess coming in just a few weeks from now. Next slide. And with that, I will end. I will say thank you again for this opportunity to present the FSMA Lab Accreditation Rule. And I guess we're turning it now perhaps to questions. And so I think Dory will be back and will be available.
Muchísimas gracias, Dory, Dr. Burr. Tenemos varias preguntas. La primera de ella la hace Quincy Lizawar. Dice, Dory, ¿cómo va el proceso de reconocimiento de certificados de GFSI para Streamline y el proceso de FSBP?
Bueno, ese trabajo sigue en pie. Como puedes imaginar, o se puede imaginar, la situación con el COVID-19 ha cambiado un poco la prioridad de trabajos, pero al tener que publicar ese trabajo en el registro federal, quedamos a la merced de la fila de documentos que la FDA quiere publicar en estos momentos. pero puedo confirmar que ese trabajo sigue en pie.
Muy bien, a ver, miremos acá qué más preguntas tenemos. Recuerden que pueden usar el módulo de preguntas y respuestas. Hay un icono con una Q y una A en la parte inferior de sus pantallas para que puedan formular las preguntas que deseen. También les recordamos que las presentaciones van a estar publicadas en el micrositio para las personas que estaban preguntando por algunas diapositivas. A ver si tenemos más preguntas.
I'm not
Creo que-
hearing the translation, so I'm not sure if
No
that was
escucho
for
la
me.
traducción.
Creo que no hay más preguntas. A ver, acá veo. Dice, los laboratorios acreditados por ONAC son reconocidos en Estados Unidos por la FDA.
Accredited laboratories are ONAC accredited laboratories are going to be accredited in the United
¿Me
States.
escuchan?
Can you hear me?
Yes, can you repeat that again?
Yes, she's asking whether the labs that have been
Los
accredited by
laboratorios
ONAC
acreditados por ONAC son reconocidos
are
por
recognized
la
in the United
FDA.
States by the FDA.
So as we set up this program, we will be requiring that accreditation bodies throughout the world will submit their application. And if they meet the requirements of the FSMA regulations, then they will be able to accredit laboratories within their purview.
Okay. ¿Existe en Colombia un programa de verificación
Is there a Colombia, in Colombia there is a foreign supplier verification program?
¿O de qué entidad a nivel global?
What entity at a global level, whether FDA would comply? Doris says that she doesn't believe this question would be for you. It would be for regulators. Another question, sampling plans, would they apply to processed products, understanding that the most recent modernization is for fresh product?
Mm-hmm. So the sampling plans, you will need to go back and remember to review the slide in terms of which types of tests are required by this regulation. Remember, it's very limited to sort of the 5 scenarios. So essentially, if the testing falls under those groups of requirements, that's where we would be requiring the sampling plans. So this isn't a blanket for all testing in the world. This is just to those testing requirements that are part of the FSMA regulation.
Otra pregunta más, dice, el proceso de acreditación de
The process of accreditation of third-party auditors for the FSMA Act is going to be done through an app or through the website of the FDA? I don't know about the first part. I can't answer it myself, but I know that you can have access through the website of the FDA and directly request it. I mean, to see what is the list of accreditation bodies in order to get the accreditation by those auditors under the TPP program. Okay, I believe that we don't have any other questions for now in the Q&A module. I don't know if there's anybody else that has a question to ask. Let's just take a look at the chat for a minute here to see if there's any other questions. Seems like there's no further questions. I think those were all of the questions that we got for you both. Thank you very much, Dr. Burr and Dory. Thanks a lot.
Oh, you're quite welcome. Thank you again for the invitation.
Thank you very much to all of you. Thank you, Burr and Dory.
You are very kind to be here with us to explain all FSMA law. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you.
You too.
Muy bien.
Great then. So at this moment, it is a pleasure to introduce Luz Miriam Moncada, technical expert of ONAC, who will be speaking about the use of labs for food safety. Okay, good morning. It's a great pleasure for me to be able to be here in this space, and we're going to be showing you some of the elements that are important and that will help us understand the participation of the labs in terms for the food safety. So we have here in this activity basically on the value chain. We're going to look at it overall in terms of the primary production, whether it's agricultural, livestock, fisheries, poultry, or any other that at any moment is producing commodities that will be eventually used. We have the distribution phase where the packaging, containers, conditions of preservation and transport of the foods play a key part of these commodities that go from the primary production. Then the stages that include transformation, processing, research and development, as well as innovation of the different products in order to be able to finally have in the area of consumption foods that are safe. So, in a macro way, how these fundamental stages bring us to be able to assure that we can truly have the elements for decision making. When we are talking about primary production, we speak about systems that help us quite a bit to have prevention in the supply chain that we have in order to assess the safety of the food from the production. So, for an agricultural practice regarding everything about the inputs by this sector, where there's a very important role of the analysis and the assessment of the vegetative material, the quality of the soil, the where this crop is being developed, the irrigation water, the type of fertilizers, bio inputs, and case of use of pesticides, among many other components that are part of the primary production process, the agricultural primary production process. In good livestock practices, we also have very important elements that need to be considered where we have the assessment from the standpoint of diagnosis in terms of the health status of those species that are eventually part of the beginning of the food chain for the processing, the hygienic conditions where these animals are located or these materials are located, and also the quality of the water that is being provided, the forage and the feed that is provided, everything regarding supplements, um, the ruminant presence of proteins that we will see eventually, and good aquaculture practices, which is also very important, the health status as far as the alevines and the management provided to them, the quality of the water, environmental safety in terms of contamination risks, etc. If there's any possibility of chemical residues in the environment, managing the hygiene at the tanks for breeding, the quality of the feed that is provided, and any trace, chemical trace or any other contaminant risk. And for poultry, we would have the control, prevention, and health of the bees, um, the hive management, the quality of the water, the agrochemicals in the environment, as well as any other contaminants that could contaminate the apiculture. What will be the role of the labs then for this stage that we have? Well, basically, we have the fronts for assessment would be aiming for the control of diseases and plagues, where we cover all of the labs that have the analysis and diagnosis of possible animal diseases. As for the agricultural part, the analysis and diagnosis of diseases and plagues and everything regarding with the agricultural production. So we have the component of inputs for agricultural inputs, the quality of the seed, for instance, the plants, the plantulas, the type of fertilizers, if there are bio inputs, the management of pesticides, and everything regarding the quality of the soil and the risk of contamination in the soil, the irrigation water, amongst other many other components that are keen within the production, the agricultural production, in terms of agricultural inputs, everything regarding food or feed in the case of the forage as well, drugs, hormones, vaccines, and other um, compounds that at some point can generate some residuality. So what is it that we have in this activity as the main role of the labs? Well, being able to generate a valid assessment, specific assessment, reliable and timely assessment for the decision making and for identifying the safety risks that are inherent to the stage of primary production. So here the labs play an extremely important role on that follow-up and that control and being able to make decisions that are timely and that are proper at some point to be able to open the door to the next part or the next step. In terms of the distribution and the processing, basically what do we find? Well, once the harvest, if it's agriculture and transport, the management of packaging, the control or the prevention of cross-contamination during these stages and during transport, the environmental conditions that are required on the vehicles where we transport these materials, and as for the case of residues of pesticides or other contaminants that might take place in those cases where the vehicle might be used for transport of commodities and on the way back for the transport of products. I mean, all of the cross-contamination risks. As far as the animal part or the livestock, all of the different stages that have to do with follow-up and control during the sacrifice or capture for the fisheries, for instance, hygienic or cleanliness conditions at the facilities where this handling is taking place or where this capture is taking place, everything regarding the indicators with cross-contamination, we require the permanent monitoring because these are high-risk products in terms of stability and the storage and transport conditions, as well as the controls in terms of the food. When we haven't had the required timeframes to eliminate any sort of residue or any metabolite in a food provided standing so that during the slaughter or the sacrifice or eventually being used as a commodity, we won't find this type of components. So what do we have here? We have the fresh trade stage where basically the risk indicator management is different to those that go into processing. Everything that we have in terms of the research of and development of products, depending on each one of the commodities and the raw materials that are being used at the origin of such production and industrial transformation. And here we have some of the tools that will allow for that preventive management through the best practices of manufacturing and the control and analysis of risk at the hazard to be able to in some way have a permanent monitoring and being able to take actions, timely actions that are going to help mitigate those risks. So basically in all of these stages, we have once again everything regarding the quality of the raw materials, whether it's agriculture or livestock, as an input before starting the process. Everything regarding the inputs for the formulation, whether they're additives or stabilizers, um, vitamins, anything else for fortification, minerals, the use of colorants, endocolorants, uh, salts, many other different ingredients that play a very important role within the formulation and the packaging where we will have to look into the different migration risk of some components depending on the material of the packaging that is actually being used. Once again, the lab's role in this stage of the process is to generate reliable information for quality control to be able to check the safety and be able to have it all. The input, the processed product, the finished product, the risk of the migration of packaging, the time and storage conditions, transport, and everything that is done with the lifespan studies to be able to determine expiration dates, the risk in terms of distribution, trade, in order to finally be able to have the product in proper consumption conditions. In all of these different stages, obviously, we need to do verification and follow up. Once again, raw materials as well as ingredients. For instance, to be able to have the nutritional information regarding the results issued in terms of the analysis for the truthfulness of the information that is actually delivered within a nutrition data sheet. So a clear identification of risk, biological risk identifiers, regardless of the type of product. Also, those chemical risk indicators, because of residuality, because of metabolites, or migration from the package, or for formulations as such, the stability indicators for each one of the foods in time, as well as other aspects where there's a support to declare the additives to be able to have the control of residues of drugs, everything regarding the microbiological quality, amongst other many other indicators that we are factoring in. Also, in the cases where the food has some elements or there is some particular information, which is a warning that needs to be issued for the consumer. So, for instance, if we have in the case of fortifying of foods of the or dietary supplements, what really matters in many of the cases is the claim of some ingredients that have allergic responses for the consumer. So there has to be a claim of the allergen, the presence or the absence of risk analytes. So because the consumer will know whether they can consume the food or not. In order to be able to issue this information, it has to be information that is clear, truthful, and reliable of the presence or not of these risk indicators, and additionally, uh, levels of concentration, if they're present, in order to be able to have clear information with which the consumer can make a decision whether to consume or not, and that they have in first hand that information. So, in the case of biological management, such as probiotics and others that are claimed under this condition. So for these cases, we find overall that the labs end up being critical actors for the indicators of safety. Why? Well, because with their outcomes, they're endorsing the validity of the outcome that is being reported. So what do we need to really bear in mind? Well, we need to have within them the infrastructure and for them to have coherent operations with the analytic scope that is required through the value chain. And there's a very important role to be played here by the scope that is tendered to us in case of assessing the foods in any of the different stages of the chain regarding the type of technique that is being employed and scope of the analytes that are going to be assessed or the bodies are going to be assessed in order to have the proper selection of that offering. The use of sound methods that are duly validated or verified so that the indicators of safety that are going to be assessed on each one of the stages are strong enough, are truthful enough, and based upon that, being able to take the required actions as well as the mitigation actions that are required through the supply chain. This technology must go pursuant to the demands in order to be able to verify the validity of the information obtained. This is a very important aspect when we find that the elements, especially in the chemical case, that are being assessed pertain to residues that are toxic or that are risk residues such as pesticide residue, heavy metal residue, as well as other molecules that need to be monitored in order to be able to back the safety throughout the whole process. Obviously, the capability of response in specific areas for safety indicators regarding chemical risk as well as biological risk. This actually then brings us to consider the importance of the laboratory as that key stakeholder that ends up being the body that assesses the conformity at this moment, and this conformity pertains to the information required by the producer or the industry in order to be able to get to know the condition of the food and its safety for consumption. Based upon that, obviously, these bodies that assess conformity are laboratories that have the required competencies from the standpoint of what is going to be assessed, how it's going to be assessed, what is the reliability upon the outcome that is issued, because the base, it is the base for all of the action plans. And based upon that, where should we head? Where we need to get the backing of the recognition of these competencies of these labs, which are a key link of each one of the stages on the value chain and in production. And in this case, we will also be speaking about recognition of competencies through means of accreditation. This is one of the important aspects where, in some way, there is an endorsement of the performance of each one of these labs in different specific areas, as well as different levels of particular demands as per it is required by each one of the users, so to speak, in the industry as well as in the part of production and eventually the trade and consumption chain. This is a fundamental aspect where the lab ends up being a very important stakeholder within this chain, because it generates the base information that when you do the risk analysis of safety in the chain, we start identifying which would be these indicators, and we need to control them permanently in order to be able to produce food that is reliable. Thank you very much to all, and basically it was a very quick sweep, a general sweep of what would be the participation of the labs and the importance of the labs within the value chain at any of the different stages of it. If there's any questions, it would be my pleasure to answer. Yes, Ms. Miriam, we have a question that states, what accreditation conditions or certification conditions must these labs have, or can it be any that is in the market right now? Well, if we talk about accreditation for the specific case of Colombia, if we speak about accreditation, it would pertain to the labs that are recognized by the national accreditation body, which is the ONAC. And in that case, it would be within the accreditation group of testing or trials. As far as the environmental side, they're still under the directive IDEAM for everything regarding water, for instance, for water supply, for primary production in terms of their quality and other aspects, we will have different scopes. So at this moment for Colombia would be issued by the ONAC at this moment. So for the agricultural side, how do we control all of the chemicals that are added? Some are detrimental to health. Why don't we choose organic production? Well, let's just say that this is a decision that needs to be made within the best practices for agricultural production, good agricultural practices, which is the replacement of the different inputs, chemical inputs that are used for inputs that are, let's say, organic or that have a lesser impact or that have time for residuality that is shorter, or that in the normal process of degradation we have once applied. If it's an agricultural product, so we have some established, some general directives regarding the type of product, the type of application, the arrays of application, also the time frames, because there are some time frames for application and post-harvest application depending on the type of product. I mean, it would be handled on that side, mostly on the primary production, mostly. It says here which accredited labs do we currently have in order to identify livestock inputs in livestock production. In that case, we will just have to check what is the list. In the ONAC website, there is a list of different accredited labs where you're going to find them broken down into sectors or the scope of coverage within the areas where they're providing their services. And in terms of the testing labs, so to speak, so for instance, there are some labs that have a scope in terms of food matrix for animal consumption of different types of foods where you're going to find them. And in other cases, you have everything regarding agricultural inputs, such as pesticides, fertilizers, the type of ingredients, so to speak, that each one has, the concentration, the presence of mixes. We need to see the area of coverage within each one of the sectors, if it's a general sector or a specific sector for livestock inputs, basically. And I guess we would have to see it based upon the list that at this moment appear of the accredited labs in the ONAC site. So we have one more question that says, which labs in Colombia provide the service of global migration and specific as well? At this moment, I wouldn't have an answer of which are the ones that are certified. You just have to look at it on the list of accredited labs that we have in the ONAC site. I don't know the names specifically for each one of them to be able to tell you which lab is the one that is able to do so, is in charge. Engineer Luz Miriam, thank you very much for your participation. It has been very illustrative, quite a bit. Okay, no, it is my pleasure, no problem. You're very kind, and I wish you a great day. Thank you. Same for you. Have a great afternoon. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bueno, en este momento vamos a la
At
conferencia.
this moment, we will move on to the presentation of the close of this cycle with a successful case presented by the ITEL lab that has participated in the quality program for exports of Colombia Productiva and the Ministry of Trade, Industry, and Tourism. And today we have Mrs. Lady Bolaño. Lady, can you hear us?
Lady, no vemos a Lady.
We don't see Lady as a participant.
Vamos a darle un momento, por favor.
Okay, let's give her a minute. It seems like she's having some connection issues, and then we will resume.
Sí, parece que vamos a tener un pequeño receso de 5 minutos.
It seems like we're going to have a quick 5-minute break. Ladies telling us that she is having connection issues, and in about 5 minutes, she will be joining us.
Hola, soy Super Acredita, la protectora de la confianza en la calidad. Hoy presentamos ¿qué es ONAC? ONAC es el Organismo Nacional de Acreditación de Colombia, una de las instituciones de la Infraestructura Nacional de Calidad, que en nuestro país se denomina SICAL. SICAL es la articulación de un conjunto de instituciones públicas y privadas que desempeñan actividades orientadas a asegurar que los bienes y servicios que se producen y circulan en el territorio nacional cumplen con requisitos de seguridad y calidad contenidos en estándares internacionales. Las diferentes infraestructuras de calidad en el mundo están integradas por actividades como la normalización, la metrología y la acreditación, que actúan conjuntamente con los reguladores y con los organismos evaluadores de la conformidad, OEC, es decir, certificadores, laboratorios de ensayo y de calibración y organismos de inspección. El rol del organismo de acreditación, que en el país es ejercido por ONAC, consiste en evaluar de manera independiente y con base en normas globalmente aceptadas la competencia de los laboratorios de ensayo y de calibración, organismos de inspección y certificadores para determinar que los bienes y servicios disponibles en el mercado cumplen con estándares internacionales. ONAC es una corporación de carácter privado que se constituyó en el año 2007 con el propósito principal de obtener el reconocimiento internacional de la actividad acreditadora en el país, haciendo posible que los resultados generados por OS acreditados por ONAC sean aceptados en mercados extranjeros. No te pierdas nuestro próximo episodio.
Ya, creo que nos acompaña.
Okay, I believe that we now have Lady joining us. Lady, can you hear us?
Lady, creo que tienes el micrófono cerrado.
Lady, I think that your microphone is mute. Can you hear me now?
Ahí se escucha
Yes,
perfecto.
we can hear you perfectly now. Okay, good morning. How's everybody doing? And well, thank you very much. Now you have the control to be able to share your screen. Good morning, lady. This is Alejandro Giraldo. Thank you very much for joining us today. And we are all very interested in your success case and what has been accomplished by your amazing lab to provide these services. Okay, thank you very much for your invitation. We are very happy to participate and to show you what has been our process. Um, can you see my screen there now? Yes, we can see your screen perfectly. Okay, great. So we're going to get started now. Oh, just a minute. My name is Lady Polania. I am the coordinator of the integrated systems of Intal Labs, and I accept this invitation. And today we're going to show you during our talk, um, just to show you that getting accredited is possible, and it's a road that requires perseverance, but can be accomplished. The agenda of the presentation, we have first the Intel, then I'm going to show you what is the processes in the test accreditation process. Then we're going to show you why we saw a need in the market, and we answer to this need, and we're taking on this challenge. We're going to show you a success case, which is to the test to determine the residue pesticides for avocado, and it is through a project that is done by a project that is actually funded by Colombia Productiva, and the future expectations that we have for the accreditation. The idea is to show you the road that we've covered and to show you our success case and what is Intel? Intel is the Institute for Food analysis. We provide services, different services amongst these services. We have 5 different labs, Intel labs. We have the lab of specialized analysis. We have the technology where we can determine different types of analysis. Many of them in the food industry. We also do so for cannabis and cosmetics, but more specifically for food safety. And let's say that there we have different tests that we carry out. We have the packaging lab where we also do tests of migration. Also in terms of the container proficiency testing that has a lot to do with food safety and classification of materials testing. We have the food lab where we do the lifespan and technical and physical chemical analysis. And as far as microbiology, we do all of the analysis that is quite required for this type of food industry and also the industry for the packages for foods. And we also have the sensorial analysis lab where we do sensor testing of foods, but also within our panel, our staff is trained to carry out um, also sensorial migration, which is about detecting how the packages can affect in flavor or smell the different foods. So another one of the services that we provide is related to innovation and development. We join in the entrepreneurs and the businesses during their product development stage. We help them do the improvement of products or processes in terms of preservation and packaging, and we provide advisory in all of these matters. We also have a process that is dedicated to the research where we participate in open calls and projects where we have universities and private sector companies in project management, also assessing the technical economic viability and the benefits of these projects there. We also have different plants. We have a cocoa plant that it is unique in Latin America because of its size, because we process small lots of cocoa. And we also have pilot plants in order to run tests. They rent out the plants in order to test the bakery meats or agro transformation. We also do courses and events that are tailor made in our sector. Was the agri industry, but we have been growing to other sectors, as I just told you a minute ago. So, regarding the accreditation, we currently have 7 different tests accredited. It has been a process of more or less 7 years altogether since we got our first accreditation, and we have been expanding the scope of our accreditations. Today, we're focusing quite a bit in foods or packages for foods. Those have been our 2 main approaches for the testing at our lab. And well, give me just a second that I'm having a little bit of a technical issue here. Okay, so what was the process to get the accreditation or to decide to go for the accreditation? First of all, let's just say that what you need to consider, or at least in our case, that we are a testing lab. Our base standard is 17025 ISO, but you also need to consider, though, a bunch of different concepts and requirements. Amongst them, the different standards, national and international, that we might find in our case, because we work hand in hand with food for the quality control of food and for the food industry. Something else is to bear in mind the market requirements, because there are some tests that might require, for instance, that are required in the market in order to be able to carry them out. So, and then the technical requirements of the test as such, the equipment or the infrastructure that is required. To bear in mind that economic resources are required because you need to be able to meet the technical requirements, and the accreditation process as such requires an investment, and you need to bear in mind the accreditation time frames, because to be able to meet the requirements of the accreditation body, you need to have had some outcomes previously. You need to have had practice on participated on proficient testing, and you need to have to meet a required time frame. So basically, these are the basic requirements based upon which um, you can decide to find the different tests that you want to get accredited. Afterwards, we need to consider within the lab and overall within the organization many different aspects for us that are obviously linked to the requirements of the accreditation body, but also pursuant of the standards. Amongst them, what comes first is the staff. It has to be skilled staff. In our case, as I said, it's been a process for 7 years. We started in 2013, more or less, and that meant throughout these 7 years to hire some of the staff. It meant also a lot of training to meet the requirements of the standard, as well as for the technical aspects of the lab, of the test itself, to be able to have some topics for the lab, such as the validation and many others. And we've also hired advisory or consulting services for these processes. Um, we have always been assisted by different professionals that have been carrying us or taking us by the hand, because it is not a mystery though, but you need to consider, however, various aspects that you at first hand might not consider. And the process is also to start learning. And another important matter is the culture within the organization, that you need to consider why is it important to get accredited? What does it mean to be accredited? What means to apply the 17025 in the lab? I always say that the accreditation is like a graduation process. What matters the most, though, first is that you meet the requirements of the standard and be able to work by meeting those requirements day in and day out. Then you need to consider afterwards within the lab specifically, as far as the equipment, one needs to be met regarding the testing, and also as far as infrastructure. So I mean, while we already had some devices, some equipment, we did have to procure the monitoring system, or investing in reagents or standards, because based upon them is how you can do the analysis, or have certain documents, because through documents you can assure the traceability of the outcomes. Also, certain software that the equipment requires, is also certain infrastructure conditions, in the fact that they have the proper temperature, that they have access control, because you need to establish confidentiality as well. So throughout these 7 years that we've been investing and we've been adjusting to all of these different aspects in the standards and in the certification. Something very important is the assuring of the validity of the outcomes. As I said, first of all, ONAC has already established for you to present or to request the accreditation. And it has already been established that there's a certain time frame in order to participate in the proficiency testing or assessment. So you need to bear in mind, you need to plan this, and this has a cost. So let's say that this also means that the vendors of proficiency testing need to be competent. They have a schedule throughout the year, so one has to choose which are those suppliers and making sure that they meet the requirements in order to be able to participate. You also need to do an investment in benchmarking material and standards, because through them is how you can actually control the quality of those outcomes that you're going to issue for the customers. Also, in terms of calibration and assessment has to be, and qualification has to be done with competent suppliers, that the staff in charge knows who the vendor is. In this case, has to be an accredited vendor in terms of the calibration procedures, and that needs to be also scheduled in everything. You need to do planning of the time in the lab, because this has to go along with the services and the customer service, but everything needs to be combined. They don't go separately, because I cannot assure to my customer then that these outcomes are valid and reliable as well, confident and reliable. So it makes the lab have to operate as a productive unit. We need to bear in mind these activities, not just bringing the sample, looking at it, producing a result, but everything that is around it in order to assure the validity and the reliability of the outcomes. And then we have to implement and to have a management system that starts by meeting the the high management of the lab or the organization need to be convinced that this is something that will help us or give us a plus, not only because of the fact that we could open other markets, but at the same time because it brings us to have a continuous improvement within the lab. It brings us to always try to have the mistakes be the minimum mistakes, and the other one is to think about the risk and think about the prevention. And we can have some initiatives that in our case is something that we started learning in the process. Now we have a consolidated methodology, and we need to bear in mind that we need to schedule audits and different reviews. And this brings us to continuous improvement. In our case, we are also certified ISO 9001 in 025. It needs to be integrated to the rest of the team, so we all speak the same language and we chase the same objective. And another important part is the validation and measuring of uncertainty during those tests for those that you are requesting the certification, and that requires of certain planning and also costs, because it also means that there is going to be some cost. But as I said before, uh, for the lab as well, because besides that, besides getting accredited, you need to provide the services through customer service and also buying the inputs, because uh, most of these products are imported. The inputs are imported, so there might be an issue with time, so we need to plan well. So, and the staff needs to be qualified and needs to be very competent, because this staff is going to do the internal or external audits for the case of ONAC. So they defend the validity of the test or the verification and measuring the uncertainty. So they need to know very well what is the data that was generated, how they were analyzed, what is the criteria that was followed in order to establish that the method was valid or not. So everything that I've showed you is what we've been doing from 2013 up till today. And in every audit, every year we learn. Let's just say this is an ongoing process, always learning, always getting better. So this, what has been our journey from 2015, we started training the staff and we started implementing our management system from 2013 to 2015. That's level one. And then through a consulting service, we started implementing NTC ISO 9001 version 2005. In 2016, we finally got the certification of 9001. And that gave us the first step in order to, the first step related to ISO NTC 0025, 17025, uh, where we started working on the process, which helped us for the new version of the standard. And we also do it so with the advisory to continue implementing. In 2017, we got our first visit by ONAC. It was our first accreditation process, and it was for two different tests for global migration and packaging, and we got the consulting service for the other five that we have already accredited by today. In 2018, we did the transition of the standard. There's another important matter that you need to bear in mind when you go through these processes, that standards also change, the versions of the standards change, and you need to renew and you need to adapt to those measures that are being taken. And then in that year, 2018, we got the assessment for expansion of ONAC for the other five tests. And during this review, to be able to accomplish this certification, we had a lot of work because one of the tests that we were trying to get certified was for determining the pesticides. And since it is so many substances, the validation and estimation of uncertainty processes were very tedious because there was a lot of information, huge information. So that meant an effort and an additional work for by the staff in order to accomplish this goal, right? So in 2019, we started the transition to the version 2017. We got the extension of the accreditation. So we continue to be accredited. And last year and this year, we started a project of productive economy to expand the scope of the accreditation to determine the pesticide residue in avocado, but through a different technique to the one that we have already had accredited. What are we doing this year? This year we got the visit for the renewal and the extension, but with the new version of 2017 of ISO 17025. And we're in the process right now. We're in the due process with the ONAC. Now focusing in the case study and how did this come about for us. Let's just say that from the beginning in Colombia Productiva, there was a program for quality certification for exports in some key sectors such as cocoa and avocado, and that's where we applied to the project in order to start accrediting the residue of pesticides in avocado, but through a different technique to the one that we had accredited. Because we were accredited. So how did this come about? Well, it has to do with what we're talking about in this event, which is safety, the need of the sector, the food sector, for the exporters through accredited testing, because we need to assure that we meet this requirement, because to be able to export these products, the countries are demanding certifications that have to do with, for instance, the European Union has global gap. So what they do, amongst what they do, is also to try to guarantee or to control the chemicals and the pesticides. So that's where we go in, and all of it bearing in mind the control for the safety of the foods um, in the phytosanitary products. In our case, for instance, so it is the need from the crop itself, because the producer needs to meet certain requirements for a specific market. But as it was brought up during the previous talk, in order to protect the health of the consumer. And so how did we start to check this or look into this matter of pesticides? We came to realize, or better yet, we started trying to find out what were the maximum limits of residues of pesticides overall and in the world, because it was for export, right? Let's just say that there are some databases here where we inquire. There's different ones in the world, and we focus more specifically on this one, which is the one for the European Union, given that we also saw that this was one of the markets that had a greater potential as far as avocado. These are databases that are free inquiry. We started basing on this one to define the molecules that were going to be included within the scope of the accreditation. We also needed to find benchmarking. We find many databases, but because of the technology that we had and because of our knowledge, we chose the method of the European Union, right? So, and also because this method has the process of validation designed uh, for the verification in our case, because this is a standardized method. So I had the advantage that not only had the method of how do we measure the pesticide residue, but how to validate it. So Maquile, here you see the method that we use in order to determine the residue of pesticide is called catchers. Catchers is a quick, a fast method that we use. And we do it through kids, and it simplifies the analysis because, as I said before, it is many of the different substances that we measure during this pesticide testing. So this has the possibility of saving us some time because it's an agile method. And in our case, We have it for different types of um, products, fruit, um, legumes, and for avocado, for instance. And here we show some of the different steps of how the sample is addressed. We come to an extract of the avocado, which we inject in the chromatographs that we have here in Intel. Here, the ones that we have are matching to mass acosometry. And this is the type of equipment that is required, demanded, or that is benchmarked in the benchmarking method. And let's just say that that's why we chose this equipment. And we started the first accreditation of this test was through liquid chromatography, given the fact that we already had some additional resources by that method. And well, the expansion or extension through gas chromatography, which is the one that we're doing right now, through the project of Colombia Productiva. When we inject the sample in the chromatograph machine, they give us these chromatograms. And what the analysts do is that they check these charts and they will draw the outcome, which is the one that is delivered to the customer in an outcome report where we compared with the maximum limits of residues as per the standards that has been defined, that many times is the one that for the European Union. And from there on, you can show whether it's conformity or not of the sample with those limits.
Currently, by liquid chromatography, we analyze 330 pesticides, and by gaseous chromatography, 200 of them, which contain this type of substances that are the ones that control, which are organophosphorate, chloride, all these sorts of elements that need to be controlled to ensure food safety. So, after all that journey, we have learned a lot from our auditors and the ONAC assessors and the technical experts, because we have been, I don't know if you can call it lucky, they have a lot of experience in general management in labs and in the tests that they have been evaluating us on. And we have learned of their experience and on their perspective, because they have the knowledge in the lab and on the tests. And we have been able to improve. We also began to see the lab as a productive process. We, by our history, we are more focused on research, but with the accreditation system, we began to see that our lab is not only what I was telling you, take a sample, do a report, but you also have around it a whole bunch of requirements which are very important, that require planning to be profitable and get clients. So it is indicated that we have to learn more on process control, that we have to very well define the capacity of the lab on how to better use all the resources, human resource as well as time, reagents, and to see that profitability. The other thing is that we have learned to develop more strategic thinking. It is not only focusing on the sample, it is going beyond to think on the market, on the client, also to develop what I was telling you, the thinking. Also, it is very nice for us that when finishing the evaluations and audits, we our strengths are stressed. We are a group of people who are engineers, chemists, and we are very strict. And because of that, we don't recognize the good things that we have. So on that feedback, it has been very valuable to see that we have walked a journey, that we didn't start from scratch. And we have learned from the errors, because we have made changes in the system, or we haven't had into consideration some situations in the lab that we should have thought about. On those experiences, we have been able to improve as a company and as people. Now, our expectations for the future with the accreditation on the short term is to keep the current scope. At the mid-term, with the specific testing, to incorporate new pesticides in the scope of the accreditation. You know that there are a lot of standards, there are many instances that are controlled. So the more we have implemented in the lab, the better. So the idea is to be able to request the accreditation of those. And we want to do that by means of an accreditation mode that has one that is called flexible scope, in which the accreditation is more flexible, as its name says, in terms of validation and other things that require time and resources, so we can work in a different manner. And it focuses more on matrices as the other scheme. So this is the sort of work that we do. We have our commercial team, also the lab, general directors, the director of project, and myself. Thank you very much. I don't know if you have any questions. Thank you very much, lady. We remind you that in the Q&A module, you can formulate the questions that you, or concerns that you may have. So we hope, or we expect your questions if you have any.
Dice Lady, ¿nos pueden recordar?
Lady, could you remind us the 7 accredited tests? Would you please remind us? Yes, I will. Obviously, in order to know more in detail the scope, you need to go into the accreditation directory. We have avocado, pesticides in fruits and vegetables with a high content on. So that is based on the classification of the Codex Alimentarium. But there are many other foods. We have the determination of primary aminos in the simulants of materials, also food. We have also determination of calcium, iron, and sodium in lactose food, and also global migration, which are contact methods, also based to be destined to be in contact with food. Another one that says the pesticide method that you use, does it comply with the FDA's requirement?
¿Me escuchaste, Lady?
Do you hear me, lady? The pesticide method that you use, does it comply with FDA's requirements? Well, it was one of the things that within these foreign standards are. That's why it is so important, the agreements on mutual recognition that ONAC has with other entities, because it allows for that inter-country trade to be recognized our competence as lab. Regarding the FDA, I don't have the answer to that question, really. I don't know if that could be answered from ONAC. The method that we apply, as I told you, is an international method, but I don't know if from ONAC to FDA, if there is any agreement that makes it valid for FDA. We have a comment that says, excellent presentation with the portfolio in pesticide portfolio. The ones in Colombia are covered, all of them, for pests control. Do you hear? Excellent presentation with the portfolio in pesticide residues. The ones registered in Colombia are covered. It depends on the food section. For some, yes, for some, they won't. It depends on the regulation of the country that is going to be exported to. That's why the idea is to increase the number of molecules to be able to get accreditation. Those are things that are seen slowly with, well, carefully with the clients, because there are some specific needs. So there are many clients that, for instance, said, do you have pesticides? Yes, but they don't know which ones. So there are some others that have a very specific knowledge. So what we do is we review from the technical and commercial part directly with the client to make sure that we offer what he or she needs. It says the analytic method that you certified, could they be chosen, or it is ONAC the one that indicates the methods that you could certify on? Well, that is a decision by the lab, unless this is a legal requirement. If this is a legal requirement that it has to be done with that specific test, there's no way around it. If it's a legal requirement, that has to be established with the ministry or in INVIMA or this sort of institutions. But in our case, we established that, as we told you, reviewing the type of regulation that the existing regulation and 2005. What we know in this sector, it is also always preferable to you choose standardized methods with the criteria, acceptance criteria. However, within our accredited scope, we have a test or a trial developed in the lab, but the validation is broader, so it depends on that. Many times it has to do with what the market asks for, because many times the market has preferences for some transaction of experts, for instance, could prefer one or another one. So when you are going to define that you are going to credit a test, you have to see what the clients ask for. As I told you, this is an investment made by the lab, so that we have to recover that investment. These processes, we have to maintain them in a continuous manner. It is not something that is done every time the auditor does. It is a matter of maintaining them continuously to keep that reliability. And we have a final question, which is for our director. It says the veterinary clinical labs that are responsibility of the ICA. What is the competence of ONAC in their accreditation, Mr. Director? Well, thank you very much. Well, those are two types of different accreditations. The accreditation given by ONAC, it's an accreditation with international recognition under the international standards, which means, for instance, that an agricultural farm crop that is certified in Global Gap, or any of these schemes offered by ONAC through its certifying bodies, has international recognition. The accreditation is simply for internal agricultural matters in the country, so that it does not give international recognition. So I believe that is the big difference between one and the other. So the ICA's accreditation for what it's needed is mandatory, while ONAC's accreditation is voluntary and is to be more competitive in the national as well as the international markets. Well, perfect. So with this, we close this second cycle. But before closing, I would like to thank especially Engineer Lady Polania, who has given us a wonderful presentation of all the step-by-step done by Intal to be able to achieve this accreditation. And to its director, Carolina Maria, that I understand is also with us. For ONAC, it's a pleasure to hear those success cases in which the accreditation has not simply been a requirement, it has been a support, an ally, and differentiating factor to be much more competitive in the market. And to hear that the evaluators of ONAC have contributed to the growth of the lab and to see the big picture. It is very satisfying for the organization. Thank you very much, engineer lady, for your presentation. Thank you very much for your invitation. And here in the lab, whoever is interested, that even if it seems difficult, or even if you think that there are internal hurdles, it is worth to bet on it and to be strict in complying requirements and to get them to be accredited. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to all your speakers who were with us today. And we remind you that through the website of the event, you might enroll to the following cycles. Thank you very much for your participation and your time. Thank you very much to all of you. It has been a very successful day. We have had about 200 participants that really give us a lot of satisfaction to be able to reach all the companies, Colombian companies, conformance evaluating bodies. Angela was telling me that we have people from other countries and nationalities, and we are reaching beyond the national borders. So we invite you very especially to the next cycle, which is the next 18th, which is on Thursday. On Thursday, we'll have the third conference day, as interesting as the ones that we have had in the year two. So we invite you to become part of them, to register, to take advantage of these teachings given to us by these presentations, and to be able to take advantage of the opportunity of reaching international markets, getting support on the national quality infrastructure. Have a nice afternoon, you all. Thank you very much.